Yeah. Well, good morning and welcome. Lots of you don't know we had a few technical issues this morning that we have now overcome, and so we're going to start our meeting straight away. And today I'm very pleased to be talking to Lee Chambers about men and menopause and his take on menopause and how men approach that whole subject of menopause and how he got involved with it. So let's go straight in, Lee. If you will tell us about yourself, what you do, please, and welcome.
Yes, also it's a pleasure to be with you today, Catherine. And yeah, so I'm Lee Chambers. I'm a business psychologist and wellbeing specialist. I run an organisation called Essentialised Workplace Wellbeing, which I founded 2.5 years ago. A lot of the work we do is looking at wellbeing strategically from an organisational perspective, ensuring it is inclusive and looks at the different intersections of the individuals it's trying to support to be well. Help organisations look how they can build structures to create equity and well-being within them. And we also do some bespoke training on a variety of different areas, things around evidence-based resilience, psychological safety, and through to some inclusion-based topics where we look how we can change behaviours and change systems so that individuals can thrive in the workplace.
Yeah, that sounds so comprehensive. And there's obviously not a lot of it being done. And as you and I both know, with the best will in the world, we can have all this research being published, all sorts of blue chip companies issuing press releases saying we're all doing these wonderful things. But the vast majority of people, it's not affecting, is it? It's, one step at a time, one meeting at a time, and getting that information out there. So I'd like to know how you became involved in equality and diversity, and of course, particularly how you noticed the challenges that women face in the workplace, and then, embracing their lives from menstruation to menopause, their reproductive life really, and how that's affected the challenges they can face in the workplace. So how did you get involved in that?
Yeah, so I mean, I've had quite a diverse journey, Catherine, and a lot of people still ask me this question to this day. It's usually one of the biggest questions that, why? And, my answer to that is why not?
Yes.
And then once I've given them a little bit of context behind it, the question becomes, why not you? And that's kind of like the little male allyship journey that I try and take people on. But my own journey, I used to run a video game business, so I was put into a leadership position at quite a young age. Being Black, I've had, feelings of exclusion and understand some of the challenges that, groups of lesser privilege can face and some of the kind of health inequities in the system. But the real big eye-opening for me, Catherine, was when I became unwell and lost the ability to walk. It was a very challenging time. At the time, my son was 18 months old, my wife was 6 months pregnant, and I needed to be there. And all of a sudden, I was, I'd lost my independence and lost my ability to support the very people who I wanted to support the most.
Frightening.
Yeah, a real challenging time. And that caused me, firstly, to take a step back and, unpeel some of the layers of masculinity that had kind of been, put onto me by society, and helped me to become a lot more sensitive and a lot more empathetic and really more emotionally intelligent and self-aware. But it was the stages after that kind of, churned the soil a little bit, that experience.
Yeah.
And then the seeds were planted when, it took 11 months to get back on my feet. But after that period, I decided to actually stop growing the business that I had and spend 4 years as a stay-at-home dad. And, that presented its own set of challenges. I was kind of, chastised a little bit by some other men because I was taking a very unconventional path and a very unconventional decision for a founder of a business. One fellow founder called me a loser for deciding to take that option. But reflecting back, I think he's the one who sees that he's lost out on his child's experiences before school. And, hindsight is a wonderful thing. But ultimately, in that time, I spent a lot of time surrounded by mothers and grandmothers. Obviously, my major support network at that time became from parent and toddler groups. And I just started to hear the stories, firstly of the grandmothers, so often the first generation into the workplace, the things they'd faced, how they'd had to try and blaze a trail for things that didn't exist, how they came into male-dominated industries and found themselves a complete afterthought in everything that existed, and really some of the stories and things that they'd been through. But what really kind of got me even deeper, Catherine, was then speaking to the mothers and finding that things hadn't really changed. Some of the NDAs they've been forced to sign because of things that had happened, having to apologize for, being pregnant, being forced into being managed out of companies because, they decided to, have a child and, exercise the right to be a parent. And then they've been harassed, they've been abused. And to be honest, the stories just kind of gradually dug deeper and deeper into me, to a point where I was just like, I have to do something about this. I wasn't aware of how it was. Being a man, you kind of walk through life a bit absent, because you've got a privilege and you don't have to think about these things and you don't hear them. But that really kind of planted the seed. And then, as I started to grow and build Essentialize, I managed to speak to a lot of senior women, and that started to kind of water those seeds, because I started to hear, especially around the menopause, the massive lack of support, just the lack of consideration, the fact that, they were being invalidated by the healthcare system, they were being invalidated by the colleagues. And they were just, again, some of the stories that I heard, a senior woman who, she became so underslept, she crashed when driving to a client meeting. And the business kind of blamed her. They just didn't give any consideration for the massive factors that had caused her to fall asleep at the wheel. Another story where, a senior woman, a director, was flooding during a meeting that had been going on for 2 hours, 15 minutes without a break. She tried to walk out, and a male director literally stood at the door and said, "Where are you going?"
That's unbelievable, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's just kind of hearing these stories, and so much around, again, I had a woman who said, I thought I had early onset dementia. All of a sudden, I'm highly competent, probably one of the best professionals in my field, which is, complicated. And I suddenly went from feeling like I knew everything, and I'd be there in meetings, like my colleagues would be slipping me notes because they could just see, and they could see that, all this information I retained, all this skill that I had, I started to feel incompetent because I knew it, but I just couldn't get it out. And others around, again, the medical system, especially, women who are perimenopausal, going to the doctor and doctor saying, "Sorry, come back in 5 years," or "Here's some antidepressants,"
So what was the diagnosis for you then? Why were you experiencing? Was it just stress, or why were you experiencing that loss of memory and everything?
Yes, I mean, when you just kind of, when the women went to find out a bit more about that, they started to realize actually they were becoming perimenopausal. There were elements of the brain fog aspects, and some of the kind of memory side of things was just being impacted. It's one of the major symptoms, and again, it just was massively impacting how they suddenly felt about themselves, and they thought they had early onset dementia when actually it's just the natural process of beginning the menopause.
It's hormones, yes.
Yeah. So
and also I found it, you're preaching to the converted, talking to me, because I can tick all those boxes. But for me, I just couldn't get a handle on these hormones. How can they be so powerful, and how are they affecting my personal relationship? Never mind my relationship at work, where I resigned from my job, where I was regularly having arguments with people and sweeping my arm across my desk in temper, throwing everything on the floor. How do hormones, what have they got to do with that? But I think for me, menopause, we can all see a list of symptoms and we just go tick, tick, tick. But it's that emotional grip, isn't it, that seems to get most women. And it's that loss of memory becomes an emotional thing. Short-term memory loss, the emotions, the crying, the falling apart, the aggression, having rows with people. And you're wondering, and people saying, "You've lost the plot," and you're thinking, "Yeah, I have." what on earth is going on? You know, I was diagnosed with depression. I self-diagnosed with bipolar. What's that all about? And only to have that confirmed by a professor of menopause who just said, yeah, that's, you know, standard fare for women going through menopause. What? So why did I have to find that out on my own? Why don't we know more about this? And do you think it's that we don't talk about it enough yet, either between each other or in the workplace?
So I definitely think that it's been such a stigmatized challenge. Part of that is kind of that wider societal piece about, you know, there being things that human beings feel like they just can't speak about. And obviously we do live in a male-centric world where, you know, anything from menstruation through to menopause is a bit taboo because we don't really kind of go through that experience, and it all seems a little bit foreign. But even for women, you know, being able to discuss this, I speak to, you know, so many women, and they say from a generational perspective, my mother never really talked to me about it very much, and then I felt a little bit uncomfortable about it. And then in my friendship circle, you know, some people are a little bit more open, some aren't. But one of the biggest things, Catherine, is I'm not sure if there's anything from a perspective, you know, of what we can go through as human beings that has such variance in how it manifests in different individuals. You know, some people again will feel like they sail through it and barely notice it. Some people will be absolutely, you know, ravaged by the symptoms to a point where it impacts every single element of their life. And we look at the statistics about women coming out of the workplace because they simply can't do the job because of the impact of the symptoms. And that creates its own set of challenge where, you know, sometimes when the stigma is removed a little bit, assumptions take the place. And we sometimes get the assumptions that, oh, well, you know, my partner went through it and she was fine. So why are you having issues? So like there becomes a lot of assumptions, even between friendship groups, about how it's impacting them. And, you know, because it's got such a variance, it's not like we live in a world where really the medical system likes to isolate a disease to a single big symptom and then find a medication to solve that big symptom. And you simply cannot do that with menopause. It's not that simple. So it does create a whole set of challenges where society is trying to, you know, boil it down into one thing. And people are like, but my experience is so different than my friend's experience. And that makes it.
And I think that's where I am today with Catherine Colas Academy, where we teach professional trainers how to go out and train in the workplace about menopause, because I always felt that I needed to bypass the medical system. Yes, you need that medical advice and support. But how do you get it if you can't verbalize, if you can't vocalize what you're trying to say, what you're feeling and experiencing? You know, even in a personal relationship, we were nearly on the steps of the divorce court, and I really didn't want that to happen. And my only resource was to write a letter. I wrote a letter to my husband, just setting out my feelings, because every time we had a conversation, it became a row. And I burst into tears, and I couldn't explain myself. You know, why do you keep crying? And I don't, you know, and it's a terrible situation to find yourself in. But if we spoke more about it, if we knew that our hormones, because of they've taken a hike, they're never coming back. Estrogen has been supporting the female system for the last 40 odd years. And now the wheels are falling off because you haven't got that same support system that you had previously. And it can cause, in many women, so much upset. And I've been asked to speak at the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, the RCOG, at one of their annual meetings. And I was made to feel, I stood up there and told my story, my 10 years of hell. And I was made to feel that I was in the minority, which was bizarre. And I'm afraid, in my menopause bubble, we're talking about it all the time. We're doing training and everything else. So we're aware of everything we're doing, and people are now listening and learning and managing. But for the majority of the population, menopause is still a minority issue. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think that firstly, I really find it offensive when bigger bodies reduce the fact that, yeah, menopause from an extreme perspective doesn't impact every single person who goes through it. But every single individual who does go through the menopause and faces extreme challenges from the symptoms is a human being.
Yes.
And deserves to be validated, deserves to be heard, and deserves not to be told, oh, it's not that bad.
Yeah.
But that wider piece, Catherine, where 51% of the global population will go through the menopause, and it directly impacts them, whether they sail through it or the symptoms are so extreme, it becomes massively debilitating.
Yeah.
They all go through the menopause, and it indirectly impacts everybody, because whether, even if you are male and you have partners, colleagues, friends, family, there's always someone in your life who's going through it. If you think about how many connections we have as human beings, even the most isolated human being will be in contact and connected to someone who is going through the menopause.
Yes.
And it's the biggest growing demographic in the workplace.
Yes.
Women between 45 to 55. It's and it's becoming a massive topic. And from my perspective, obviously, organisations have a culture and a structure within them where we can bring in some of that awareness, some of that education, and that can then start to seep out into wider society. Because obviously, from an organisational perspective, that there is a level of understanding about how some of the ability to really see and think about the people that we work with on an everyday basis, who sometimes we spend more time with than our own families and friends. But the opportunity to look at where potential little bits of support can be, and how we can actually all come together to realise that a little bit of menopause awareness and education actually makes us better human beings, makes us more wise, and also allows us to potentially be that little bit of support that's needed. Because like we've spoken about before, Catherine, even women who are struggling significantly, they never say, oh, I really want saving, I want the world changing to my menopausal symptoms. What they say is just a little bit of compassion, a little bit of support, and a listening ear every now and again, and it would make the whole world of difference.
Yes, yeah, that's all. It's not about, I say to women, asking them about different things, and I'm just going to put this lady on mute, and asking, I've forgotten my train of thought now. I've forgotten my train of thought.
You were asking women.
Yes, asking women about their menopause experience and what they wanted to happen. And I think without exception, they would say, we don't want a light shone on me, on us, on this particular issue. We just want the organisation to understand what's going on and have certain things in place to help provide that support, where we can go, who we can talk to. And so it doesn't need to interrupt the daily life of an organisation. And I've been talking a lot to police forces, fire and rescue services, who have a lot of issues themselves, and how it affects women, the uniform they have to wear, if they've got firearms, it's really, really heavy, the type of uniform and all those different aspects. And then coming just into perhaps in an office situation, there are so many things going on. And I've heard stories, women falling asleep at their desk and somebody else reporting them for it, instead of saying, can I help? What's going on? This isn't like you to be falling asleep at your desk. Like, you told that story of the lady crashing her car. And, but people, is it jealousy? Is it, oh, she's not doing her job properly, I'm going to report her for this? Why can't we be a little more empathetic? Because we can see that person, there must be something wrong for somebody to be falling asleep in the middle of their shift. And
Yeah.
it could be any kind of illness, but in this particular case, it was menopause.
Yeah, and for me, Catherine, it's that case of, again, a lot of our work as an organisation is around looking how we create those cultures of care within organisations, because, again, the stories I've heard of, and women end up on disciplinaries,
Yep.
being performance managed. No one's actually taken a step and asked them what support they might need. And you know what? Sometimes for many women, they say, I didn't realise I started to become perimenopausal,
Yeah.
because the education for them over the years has been so low and the awareness is low, and it's not something that's spoken about.
Yes.
And I suppose the interesting thing is when they start to go on that journey themselves and get that realization, for some, they actually want a little bit of space to be able to talk about it. Maybe someone in the workplace who's a designated person who's got a bit more advice they can impart.
Yes.
Someone who maybe they can report into if they really are struggling, so they don't necessarily have to always go to the direct line manager to
Yes.
say, I need this time off because of these menopause symptoms, because
Yes.
it's kind of helping those disclose to someone who they feel confident in disclosing to, where there is that trust there. But also taking managers on that journey as well. I think that, managers have such a role to play in
Yes.
helping to normalise the conversations, whether they be female or male, or
Yes.
however they identify.
That's right. And they do need the training to understand that, to know what's going on. They don't need a biology lesson. They just need to understand what's going on. And then they can have a whole system in place within the organization that so that it flags it up. When this happens, you go to this place and these people can help support you, so that there's always something in place to help them, to provide that help and support. And what does that do to the organisation overall? I've always said, if an organisation says that they recognise menopause and they have steps in place to help and support women, they would have a queue around the block for people wanting to work for that organisation, because all of a sudden it just takes the stress and anxiety off your shoulders, and you can perform to your full ability, and you can be acknowledged that even though, this is happening to young women as well, not just women in their 40s and 50s, it's women in their 30s too. And then of course you go, we're now working longer. Women are now making history. We're working longer than we've ever before, and full time. So we now have that aging aspect of our lives, and that this works for men as well, where perhaps we're overlooked when it comes to new training, we're overlooked when it comes to promotion, we're overlooked when it comes to growing up the ladder and getting on the board of directors. And that's a whole other issue, but it's certainly for women, it stems from that menopausal period, when many of them, as you've already said, are resigning and leaving. And but what's happened with us, it's been brilliant from my organisation's perspective, because those women that have resigned from the corporate world have now turned it around. They wanted to understand more about what was going on, and they've now become trainers, and they're taking it back into the workplace. So it is becoming full circle. But it's a very difficult one, isn't it? What do you think? I would like to stand up. I'm always standing up and saying we need men trainers. We need men to join a company like myself, understand more about menopause, and that a man goes out into the workplace and gives this training. Would they get more people on the course because he's a man? But in the case of a male-dominated industry, for instance, what do you think men can add to that knowledge and to sharing that knowledge with an organisation?
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, Catherine, there's definitely a place for male allies for training of gender health inequalities from men, and for men to actually be part of the conversation about how we look at some of these challenges that women face on a daily basis, and use our privilege as a way to challenge those, both systems, structures, behaviours, and take people on that journey as well. And for me, I kind of take a step back and look at it quite objectively, and realise that, from what I've seen, A lot of companies are looking at things such as gender parity at board level. They're looking for more gender equity in senior leadership positions. And then I take a look at the reality. And a lot of women, who are kind of approaching 45, they've got care and responsibilities upwards to the parents, downwards to the children. They're managing a position and lots of variables. They've had to overcome many barriers and obstacles over the potential 20 to 25 working year career. Probably the first in the family to go into education, further education as well. So they've achieved so much. Usually they're highly competent, highly skilled because of the amount of things they've had to scale, the amount of situations they've had to overcome, and the continued microaggressions and resistance they've faced, no matter what industry they're in. So, these are the individuals who have the most resilience, they have the most adaptability, and usually it's where the innovation comes from. And businesses are ignorantly losing these incredibly talented, skilled women who are also facing some of the societal challenges of becoming more invisible as they age, and some of the extra levels of ageism that are also built into that, while still having to wear 10 hats on a daily basis. So you can see how those menopausal symptoms that, a man might think, oh, I've had brain fog before. Yeah, it was a bit of a pain, but they didn't have to navigate so many different aspects with the brain fog and potentially other symptoms alongside it. So for me, it's almost trying to get men to imagine and get themselves a little bit into the shoes of someone who is struggling, but also start to think about that wider perspective as well. Because, from a gender health inequity perspective, men don't really have that much challenge they have to face directly, nowhere near as many challenges as women face from a health perspective, and we have no monthly cycle that we have to manage and mitigate and control, so we lack the relevance for that. So kind of my vision is to get more men speaking about this, firstly because become better supporters for the partners. And that's so often a big thing where men start to feel maybe a bit unwanted and become a bit defensive when they see, the partner's behaviours potentially changing, and some of the other things around, a relationship, they will change in that period. And I think for men, a little bit of awareness and a little bit of understanding can actually make relationships stronger, as, a man can actually be that support, but also be the one who suggests, well, we can't do what we used to, but let's do this together. And actually, it can create a really strong bond going through that adverse time together, which is, a natural place to go through. But many men are just not prepared for that kind of almost evolution in their relationship.
And I think as women are going through menopause, because of the mixed state of emotions they find themselves in, that they also reach that point, they're in a relationship where they think, we've come to the end of the road, we've got nothing in common anymore, kids have grown up, or whatever is happening in their lives, we've reached that stage, I don't like you anymore, I don't like you anymore. Which is exactly what happened to me. And I hear so many stories. I even asked my husband, I interviewed him when I was post-menopause, and I said, because I need to know, I had a list of questions, I need to know what it was like for you living with a woman going through menopause. And I was in tears because he was describing a person I never knew. Who is this person he's talking about? That's not me. And he even said that, it was like living with a stranger, sleeping with a stranger. And I said, if you could describe in a short sentence, in a few words, about menopause, how would you do that? And he said, menopause is like a hurricane. It's dangerous and deadly. And, I'm tearing up now. It was just so profound and wow. And I hear that all the time, the stories that men are telling, and where women don't want to collaborate, or not collaborate's the wrong word, to join in the conversation with them. It's more a case of, you don't know anything about this, stay away. And they end up divorcing. I even heard a doctor on the radio one day. They were talking about menopause, and he said, if only I'd known more about menopause, I would not have divorced my wife. And, that's coming from a doctor. And and that was years ago, but I'm still hearing these stories today. So although I'm in my little menopause bubble and I know we're making a difference, changing people's lives, there's still millions of women and men out there who don't get it, who are not understanding it. And the trauma it can cause in relationships, both at home and at work, is unforgivable, really, for a subject that we should all know a little more about. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so from my perspective, that awareness and education piece is absolutely vital because, again, it indirectly impacts everyone. It's not, it's not a condition, a disease that impacts, 0.1% of the population. And, some of those diseases that, again, can be quite rare, we actually know quite a lot about through campaigns, through, a real kind of level of activism, almost getting them to a point where the public knows what to look out for,
Yes.
what the main challenges are, what the impacts are on other individuals. And I kind of feel that, again, maybe if we switch the hormones round and men went through menopause and women didn't, that the whole world would be a different place now today.
Yeah.
I can honestly say that when I kind of step out as a man who's gone on a bit of a self-awareness journey, the amount of things that I see now where I'm like, that's been designed for men. That's been designed for men. That's been designed by men. And once you set off on this journey, you can't unsee what you started to realize. So it becomes in some ways humbling, in some ways scary. But I, again, do feel that, there's such a point there where we've got to look at the impact on the individuals who go through this and don't have that support, because, again, they don't, like you said, they don't want a massive spotlight shining on them. They don't want to stand on the top of the hill shouting, I'm going through the menopause and please help me. They just want to keep doing what they're doing, which normally they're doing to incredible levels given what they're going through, with that little bit of support, that little bit of consideration, and men not to be like, oh, she's complaining about it again, or geez, what's up with her? And my job is to kind of go into organizations and just challenge that and say, look, just imagine if you were going through this. Just think about how you can be that bit of support. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to become a professor. You just need a little bit of consideration, a little bit of kindness, and that bit of knowledge to be looking out for those subtle changes in behaviours in those who you spend a lot of time with, and those who ultimately, in many ways, you care about. And for me, that really kind of then stands out when you can potentially be someone who can support them on that journey. I think it's quite often important for partners to go and engage in the medical system with their wives. Because having someone with you to kind of just validate what you're saying and support you in that journey, I think is so important, because, again, with the emotional balance challenges that menopause can cause, it can make you honestly believe that you start to doubt yourself. And it's very, very difficult to articulate emotions in words as humans. It's not an easy thing to do. And I just think that, again, it's just these little things where you can put a little bit of time and effort in to educate yourself, because it shouldn't be anyone else's responsibility to take you on this journey. A little bit of self-education, raise your level of awareness. And in the workplace, you can be an ally. You can actually make a difference, because, menopause is just one of many inequities that women face in the workplace. But I think it's a great place to start and look, because it directly impacts half the working population, and it indirectly impacts every single person who's employed there. So why are we only getting to the point now where we're starting to talk about it? It's beyond time. And for me, women have been quietened and muted too often in the workplace. It's time we heard their voices, let their lived experiences come through. And, for me, one of the biggest things in my work is finding male case studies within organizations to share their journey, because it makes it real for many other men as well, who are not really getting into it. But a male trainer and a male case study, it gets men to really start to engage and think about, at one point, maybe they might be sat in the pub talking about the menopause.
Well, my husband does it on the golf course now. he tells me, oh, so-and-so's wife's going through menopause. I've told them all about blah, 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 blah. So it's quite interesting. But something else that cropped up recently with one of my trainers, she'd gone through an early menopause, and it made me think that we need to look differently at that word menopause and all its implications, because she was diagnosed with acute estrogen deficiency. In any other words, what is that? It's menopause. So, and of course, because it's acute, it gets dealt with, it gets attention, somebody focuses on it and helps and supports you, which is what happened to her. She still had a long journey because she was so young, they were trying to feed her with additional estrogen to try and boost her system so that she didn't go into an early menopause. But by the same token, I thought if we called menopause acute estrogen deficiency, perhaps we'd be on a higher rung of the ladder and get more attention for it. But I'm a small voice in that direction. But it's, you know, little things that make bigger changes. But I think women feel it's a burden. It's one of those guilt things, isn't it? Because we feel suppressed. As you've said, we haven't had the support across the ages, and some of the stories we hear, you'd think we were in Victorian England. Some of the responses to the experiences that women are feeling and not being supported. And so I think, how can we overcome that guilt? Has it got to be bolder women that go up to their managers and say, look, I believe I'm going through menopause. What's the organisation doing about it? Or what would you suggest women could do to broaden the understanding of menopause or get people talking in the workplace about it?
Yeah, well, I think like anything, Catherine, it requires like a multifaceted approach. It does require those with the lived experiences and being willing to be quite vulnerable and share those. But not everyone feels that they're in a position to do that. No. And that can present different challenges based on the culture of the organisation you work within. But there's always activists on the front lines willing to share those stories. And even for you, Catherine, having been, you know, in this kind of space for 15 years, when, you know, you were one of very few, and now it has got some traction finally. And sometimes it's about using that traction that's both political and social within organisations to push the agenda forward. It does require, you know, both older and younger men and women to be part of moving that discussion forward. Being able to look at it across different functions and different ways. And some organisations are massive, some are smaller, but there's definitely great best practice starting to happen across different organisations that needs to be shared.
Yes.
And, you know, some of it is coming from, you know, menopause resource groups within organisations or gender networks sharing best practice and really showing how they can make a lot of adjustments without lots of budget. There are a lot of, you know, things that can make a difference, small bits of flexibility, small changes to uniforms, small considerations around equipment and processes to be able to help those people feel like, again, they are more supported. So there are, you know, some quick wins that every organisation can consider, and starting to learn those and getting more, you know, passionate. So often it's led from a HR perspective and someone who's going through it. But again, there's so many different avenues to take. It's just making them, building that momentum, but, you know, finding that balance between understanding that it has a massive impact on individuals, especially certain ones who are suffering, but not to the point where it becomes, again, a massive spotlight is shone upon those people and it's overly medicalized to a point where, you know, they're being told that there's something wrong with them. And so it's finding that balance, but I think we have started to get that traction. That's got me positive. And obviously I continue to challenge my clients and, you know, do things such as this with yourself, Catherine, to really get men to start to think about what role they can play in that. Because still within society, within politics, within organisations, they still hold so much of the decision-making power and the budgets to make bigger things happen. And, you know, if men can unlock those, we'll see even more change going forward.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And perhaps that's something we can get to together on, Lee, to try and move that forward. But you just reminded me about HR. We hear, our experience, we hear so much. HR is, oh, we've got to do something about menopause, HR. And they're going, but I don't know anything about it. What do I do? And they feel so so stressed out by it all because they don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. They're grabbing information off the internet. They don't know what on earth the information is about, whether it has value or anything else. And they're going, here you are, here's some menopause information. And I know that from, again, from my trainers, from big organizations, that their HR department is so put upon and doesn't have either the skill set, the knowledge, the understanding to do anything properly about it. So they just go on the internet. Let's Google it. Oh yeah, we've got this, right? Upload that. Here you are, guys, girls and boys. Here's the information, get on with it. We are doing something about menopause, and it's just rubbish, isn't it? It's like handing somebody a leaflet with a list of symptoms. You can go, yeah, okay, now what? Yeah, I tick all those boxes, thank you.
Yeah, and that sustained action, Catherine, is, you know, part of the ongoing conversation. It's not just the tick box, done it once, one policy. It's continued education. It's building upon the foundations, and it's continuing to bring those stories to life and give people the space to be able to share without being judged. And that again creates a level of boldness and positivity in others to share how much they feel comfortable with at that moment in time too.
Yes, it just needs a couple of flag bearers, doesn't it, for others to join in and share that story. And we're getting a message in. Thank you, Lee, for giving us your time and perspective on this. So it's about being bold. And I think finally, because this call was due to finish at 11, and I'm aware that that you yourself have other appointments to get to. And so I think in closing, I think today the amount of information that you have spoken about, the conversation that we've had here, the broad aspect of bringing everything into it, we really have got to get men more involved. They can't be on the periphery, because something else I've noticed is when you're talking to an organization about menopause, from our perspective, or from women's perspectives, they want it to be a long-term thing. It's got to be on the health and well-being agenda forever, not just this week, next month. It's menopause months in October. Let's do it now and say, yeah, here we are, we've done something. It's rubbish. It needs this long-term support and effectiveness to be able to do something about it. And we've got to bring men into the conversation much more. And I noticed, as I was saying just now, that organizations, another way of dealing with it is, let's give it to the women's groups. We've got a big organization, obviously. They have women's groups who discuss everything about their own lives, everything to do with their jobs, promotions, etc., etc. It's a support network. But the board are thinking that by dropping this subject into the women's network, that it's happy days. Oh well, we've dealt with it. The ladies are getting on with it, and there we are. We've done it. We've done our bit, and then we can issue a press release and say, "Look at us! Aren't we wonderful? We've done these great things." So, do you have anything further to add before we close this meeting, Lee?
Yeah, Catherine, I just want to mirror those, those thoughts. It's a continual process. We have to look at it from different angles. Men need to be involved in the conversation. In fact, men can often actually bring a different viewpoint, unlock different aspects, and really be part of making it happen going forward. But yeah, sustained part of the wider wellbeing strategy and looking at different aspects of a business through a menopause lens.
Yeah. And apologies to you, Lee. I've just seen that I knew you had another appointment and you've got to dash off quickly. But thank you so much for joining us today. We have recorded this. We had technical issues at the beginning, but everybody who registered will get the recording. Speak to you soon, Lee. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you again, Catherine.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.